Well, I'm back, and so is our little friend here. So, here's to you, Team Bass 2000, and what you're doing. I think it's fantastic, and we appreciate you. Do not chug coffee. Anyway, it's time for our little story to begin, so if there's no further ado, shall we? I was young, far too young to be fishing. But Father said it was time for me to become a man. And so, he took me to a very small pond. To be honest, it was the tiniest pond I'd ever seen. I'm surprised there were even fish in there, to be honest with you. But he took me. Didn't have a lot of money or equipment, but Dad had a friend who had a few things that he loaned us, and so we set out on this great adventure to catch fish. Dad and I began our day with worms and bobbers. I know a lot of people are against using live bait, but I was only a boy. I was young, and I had just come into my own. And I think Dad just wanted me to understand and to know what it was like to catch fish. And so we began to fish. One by one, I began pulling in bluegill after bluegill and the occasional crappie. And boy, our stringer was filling up, and we were so very happy to be bonding son and father, or stereotypically known as father and son. 2001. I remember when Dad let me cast for the first time. You see, that's the most powerful moment of the story. For you see, it was on this very first cast that a wonderful adventure would begin. So there I was, ready to make my first cast. Oh, I threw that bobber out there with all my might. It was a beautiful cast. Landed about 2 feet from the shoreline, about 25 to 30 yards out. And I could not believe my eyes. The bobber disappeared. I don't mean a little tug, 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 and then down she went. I mean, as soon as the spear of the bobber hit the surface of the water, it was as if a vortex opened up below the bobber and sucked it down. It was gone. I didn't really know what to do. I was in awe. In awe of this thing, whatever it was that had taken my bobber down. Well, I set the hook, and I set it good. And as I began to reel, I began to realize this was no job for a small boy. This was not something I could do on my own. Oh, I reeled with a futile attempt at landing the fish for about 2 minutes. But there was nothing I could do. I was outmatched. I was outmanned. I was outgunned. Insert metaphor here. I mean, I was totally shot, man. I was toast. So, like any other 5-year-old boy would do, I cried to Daddy for help. I yelled out, "Daddy, I can't do this. Take it from me." And he did. Looking back, it was probably greed. He wanted to catch the fish himself. But I thought he was trying to help, and so he took the reel. I kid you not. When Dad took the reel, it seemed as if the fish knew that the owner had changed hands, and he almost put his speed into hyperdrive. The reel began to spin line out as the drag raced to catch up with the fish. And then the line snapped. But that's not the end of our story. We weren't done fishing. You see, the man who had loaned us this equipment hadn't told us that the line on the spool was approximately 5 million years old. Dad was mad. He's a preacher, and I think that was the closest I ever heard my father to cursing. Dad decided that night that he'd go out and buy a brand new spool of line. I don't remember what kind, I just know it was enough to do the job. The following day, we went back to work. Now, the odds were against us. What fish in its right mind would bite after being snagged and breaking off the hook? I'll tell you what kind of fish. Jaws. Have you ever seen that movie? That's the kind of fish this was. It didn't like people. And sure enough, the fish attacked my father's line again. But this time, the line held. And Dad pulled in a 12-pound channel catfish from that little pond. Now I know what you're thinking. How do I know it was the same fish from the day before? Well, perhaps it was the 5 hooks still in the fish's mouth and my number 4 hook from the day prior with about 3 inches of tagline, freshly broken. There was a number 1 hook in the side of its mouth. There were a couple of number 2 hooks in its mouth. And then there were a couple of number 4 hooks in its mouth. This fish had broken off 5 people's lines. But it didn't break off our line. And we were poor people, so I must tell you that yes, that fish was eaten. As a matter of fact, it was eaten like almost immediately. I don't even know if we cooked it. Now, there's one more piece of this story I think you'll like to hear. It's probably one of the grossest things you've ever heard. Years later, after thinking and reminiscing about our beautiful time together, Dad and I found out that the very pond we caught that fish in was at the time being used as a drain for the septic system of a small town. Maybe that's why that fish tasted so funny and had several extra fins. So here's to you, Team Bass 2000, once again, for all you do. You catch several large fish on a regular basis, and it really is encouraging to watch from the perspective of someone who doesn't catch very many fish. So thank you. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
2001, 2002, 2000...
Insert metaphor here. I mean, I was totally shot, man. I was toast. So like any other 5-year-old boy would do, I cried. So like any...